Listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you was never meant to escape the locked files of the state archives. For decades, Thornhill Asylum stood like a festering wound at the edge of civilization, a looming fortress of stone where the unwanted, the broken, and the inconvenient were hidden away. But Thornhill was never just a hospital. Behind its barred windows and crumbling walls, rituals of silence and suffering unfolded, sanctioned not by medicine, but by men who understood the power of fear. The truth is this: Thornhill was not built to heal the mind. It was built to fracture it, to strip identity, and to mold human beings into something else. The patients were subjects, and the doctors were not healers but priests of a darker order. You were never meant to hear this. That's why the very mention of Thornhill still unsettles those who know. And now you will know. Welcome to the story that has been buried beneath layers of denial, secrecy, and blood. But tread carefully. Once you open the doors of Thornhill, you can never close them again. The asylum was founded in 1892 under the guise of progressive mental health reform. The newspapers of the time hailed Thornhill as a beacon of compassion, a sprawling institution where the disturbed could find solace. But there was a curious detail buried in the charter. Unlike other asylums of its era, Thornhill's board of trustees included not just physicians, but politicians, industrial magnates, and one clergyman whose name never appeared on public records. Why would men of power gather to oversee a house of the broken? Because Thornhill's walls were more than stone. They were a laboratory of control. Patients were not admitted merely for madness, but for disobedience. Wives who defied their husbands, workers who whispered about unions, soldiers who returned from war with too many questions, each could find themselves dragged through Thornhill's gates. This was the first secret of Thornhill. It was not a hospital at all, but a prison for inconvenient minds. And the experiments conducted within would make modern torture chambers look almost merciful. The daily life inside Thornhill was designed not to soothe, but to unmake. Patients awoke to the blaring shriek of bells, marched in silence to meager meals laced with sedatives, and were confined to barren rooms where the walls themselves seemed to whisper. Isolation was not the punishment, it was the baseline. But Thornhill had its special treatments. Ice baths that left skin blue and teeth chattering until lips split from cold. Electroshock not as therapy but as ritual, delivered in rhythmic sequences as if summoning something invisible. And then there were the chambers. Rooms no patient spoke of afterward, because those who entered often did not return. The staff called them reflection rooms, but survivors described walls etched with symbols, voices chanting behind hidden panels, and a sensation of being watched by something inhuman. Thornhill's secret was not only cruelty, it was invocation. The asylum was feeding something. What it was feeding, no one dared to name. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Thornhill was not abandoned because of neglect. It was abandoned because it became too obvious. By the late 1930s, whispers began leaking into the surrounding towns. Farmers spoke of shadows pacing the asylum's roof at night. A gravedigger claimed he was paid in gold coins to bury bodies with their tongues cut out. A nurse who escaped swore that she heard the doctors speaking in languages no human tongue was meant to form. Reports mounted of patients clawing their own eyes, insisting they saw the halls breathing. Yet when inspectors came, they found pristine wards and smiling staff, as though the asylum shifted into an illusion when authority entered. But the truth could not be hidden forever. A fire in 1943 consumed one wing of the asylum, and for a brief moment, the townspeople caught sight of things they could never unsee. Witnesses spoke of skeletal figures bound in iron masks, dragged from the flames by doctors who bore no burns, no fear, only silence. From that day forward, Thornhill was not just feared, it was shunned. But Thornhill's closure is a lie. Official records claim the asylum shut its doors in 1957 after decades of budget cuts and declining need. Yet, those who have dared to trespass into its ruins know otherwise. The power has never left. The air inside remains unnaturally cold even in summer. Candles refuse to stay lit in the old surgical theater. Graffiti left by explorers vanishes overnight, replaced with markings that match the symbols described by patients a century ago. And here is the darkest secret. Files recovered from a hidden basement, smuggled out by a former groundskeeper, suggest that Thornhill was not simply a place of madness. It was an experiment in controlling the human soul. The doctors were not just men, but initiates of an order that believed suffering could fracture the psyche and open doorways. Patients were raw material. The asylum was their crucible. And what emerged from Thornhill was not always human. This is the descent you've now begun. We are only at the threshold, and already the air feels heavier, doesn't it? Every asylum has ghosts, but Thornhill's hauntings are different. They are not echoes of the dead, but projections of the broken. Survivors who escaped in the 1920s described a disturbing phenomenon. They would wake at night to find their rooms not as they remembered, but twisted replicas of Thornhill's wards. Beds bolted to the floor. Peeling plaster. The same suffocating stench of disinfectant and rot. These visions followed them until death, as if Thornhill itself had burrowed into their minds and claimed permanent residency. Psychologists later dismissed these stories as trauma, but the consistency across patients is impossible to ignore. Some even swore that in dreams they saw the same man, tall, gaunt, in a doctor's coat that never stained, whispering in a voice that vibrated like static. He was never named in records, but patients described him in identical detail. The figure became known in whispered legends as the superintendent, a shadow who did not merely manage Thornhill but inhabited it, like an intelligence fused with the asylum's bones. If Thornhill was an experiment, he was its overseer. And perhaps still is. By mid-century, a new layer of horror emerged. Declassified documents hint that Thornhill became a site of covert government interest. As World War II ended, intelligence agencies scoured Europe for knowledge seized from Nazi psychiatric experiments. Thornhill, already cloaked in secrecy, became the perfect vessel to receive this knowledge. Electroshock frequencies adjusted to precise hertz ranges. Sedatives dosed in patterns rather than amounts. And most disturbing, sensory deprivation tanks installed in hidden sub-basements, years before they were publicly known. Officially, these techniques were about studying the human mind under stress. But internal memos, scrawled in cold bureaucratic tone, betray the truth. Thornhill was testing whether human consciousness could be split, fractured, and remade into something obedient. The asylum was not alone in this. Projects like MKUltra would later emerge in headlines, but Thornhill was among the first. A proving ground where minds were shattered not for healing but for control. And the superintendent's shadow lingered in every experiment, as though the order running Thornhill had found new allies in government halls. But here is where the story bends into something darker than politics. Former orderlies, speaking decades later on deathbeds, admitted they were instructed never to look too closely into the reflection rooms. Yet one disobeyed. He described seeing patients not screaming but chanting, mouths foaming, eyes rolled back, bodies moving in unison to rhythms no sane mind could conceive. The orderlies thought it was a staged ritual. Until one night, the walls themselves began to pulse with light, like veins carrying blood. He fled before the doctors noticed. But he claimed the doctors weren't afraid. They were expectant. Almost celebratory. If this is true, then Thornhill was not simply a psychiatric prison or a government lab. It was a temple, disguised in the trappings of medicine, built to harness pain as offering. The asylum's suffering wasn't waste. It was fuel. And the superintendent? Perhaps he was never a man at all, but the mouthpiece of whatever fed on that fuel. The question is not what happened inside Thornhill. The question is, what was being summoned? And if you think the terror ended with Thornhill's closure, you are mistaken. Hikers and thrill seekers who trespassed in the ruins during the 1970s reported strange compulsions, an overwhelming urge to descend deeper, into basements that should not exist according to blueprints. Some described staircases that spiraled far below the earth, deeper than the building's foundation. Yet when they returned in daylight, the staircases were gone. Others reported missing time, hours vanishing, only to awaken outside the asylum's gates with dirt under their fingernails and words scrawled into their skin. One message repeated across multiple trespassers: return to the ward. It is as though Thornhill itself became a living organism, luring back not only those once imprisoned but anyone who crossed its path. If buildings can remember, Thornhill remembers everything. And it waits. The ruins are not silent, they hum. And if you listen too long, you will hum with them. Here is the truth they will never admit: Thornhill was never destroyed. Official maps list the structure as condemned, the land fenced off. But satellite imagery reveals otherwise: structures still intact, shadows and windows where no one should be. Contractors sent to demolish sections of the building either withdrew mysteriously or never returned. And when urban explorers try to film inside, their footage corrodes, audio distorts, batteries drain as though the asylum consumes energy itself. It resists erasure. It resists silence. Which raises the forbidden possibility: Thornhill was not simply a place but a mechanism. A device designed to fracture reality through human suffering. And once a machine like that is built, can it ever truly be shut down? Or does it keep running, unseen, drawing in the curious, the desperate, the bold, until the cycle continues? This is why Thornhill has been scrubbed from history books. Because if enough people looked closely, they might realize it isn't an abandoned asylum at all. It is still open, just waiting for its next patient. Not long after Thornhill's supposed closure, rumors spread of sealed archives locked away in state storage. For decades, those files were untouchable, classified under vague, national security protections. But fragments leaked. Court transcripts with entire sections blacked out. Transfer orders for patients who had never been admitted elsewhere. Lists of names, hundreds long, that disappeared from census records after Thornhill. The pattern was unmistakable. People didn't just enter Thornhill, they vanished into it. And then came the chilling revelation. Some of these missing names resurfaced years later, alive but altered. Men and women who spoke with flat voices, who remembered nothing before Thornhill, who performed menial tasks with robotic precision until they died. Families recognized their faces, but swore their souls were gone. The archives, incomplete as they are, point to a system of psychological erasure. Thornhill was not an asylum. It was a factory of blank slates. And what's more terrifying, those slates were being written upon by unseen hands. The control mechanisms tested in Thornhill were not crude. They were precise, layered like the gears of a clock. First, the body was broken, through malnutrition, exhaustion, and physical torment. Then came the drugs, dulling the mind until thought itself slowed to a crawl. Next, isolation. Days, weeks, even months in rooms where sound was muted and light distorted. By the time patients were dragged into the reflection rooms, they were hollow vessels ready to be filled. Survivors described chanting sequences and hypnotic voices repeating the same phrases until identity unraveled. What the doctors were implanting into those minds remains unclear, but one chilling document lists command phrases alongside patient numbers, as though people were being programmed to respond to words like machines. The idea of mind control has often been dismissed as conspiracy. But Thornhill stands as proof it was real, and it was perfected long before the public ever heard the term. The asylum was not treating madness. It was manufacturing obedience. And who benefited from this obedience? That is the question hidden in plain sight. The politicians on Thornhill's board certainly had motives. to silence dissenters, to neutralize threats. The industrial magnates had their motives too. Workers stripped of unions and individuality made pliable labor. But the clergy member, the faceless man without records? His purpose remains the most disturbing. Some researchers speculate he represented a secret order, one far older than any government. An order that believed the human mind was not sacred, but clay to be shaped. In their worldview, the soul was not divine, it was currency. Pain was the mint. Thornhill was not only training grounds for obedience, but a furnace that transmuted human suffering into energy. And that energy, some believed, could be harvested, not metaphorically but literally. Think of it, the asylum as an engine, not of medicine, not of reform, but of extraction. Not coal, not oil. Souls that be. Why the 1960s, whispers of Thornhill reached the outside world in strange ways. A handful of psychiatric papers, quickly discredited, hinted at identity dissociation through external scripting. Journalists who dug too close found themselves ruined, branded conspiracy theorists, stripped of credibility. One reporter vanished outright, last seen approaching the asylum's gates with a camera crew, yet no footage survived. And yet, despite every effort to bury Thornhill, the asylum's influence bled outward. Techniques pioneered within its walls, sleep deprivation, sensory disruption, repeated suggestion, appear almost verbatim in manuals later used by military interrogators. Even advertising psychology borrows echoes of Thornhill's experiments, subtly manipulating desires and fears. The asylum may have been sealed, but its methods escaped, spreading like spores. Every time you see a commercial that makes you doubt yourself, every headline that bends reality, you are glimpsing Thornhill's shadow. The asylum was never about the patients inside. It was about everyone outside, and here is where the descent grows personal. Thornhill is not just history, it is inheritance. The systems tested there seeped into schools, prisons, workplaces. Anywhere obedience was needed, Thornhill's ghost appeared. Think about it. The bells that mark your hours, the fluorescent lights that hum overhead, the architecture of isolation built into cubicles and classrooms. These are not coincidences. They are echoes. Thornhill was the prototype and the world became its expansion. But the true danger is this: Thornhill did not merely break people. It remade them. Which raises a terrifying possibility: how many of us are living under suggestions seeded long ago? How many of us carry invisible scripts, implanted in moments of weakness, activated by words we don't even recognize? The asylum may stand in ruins, but Thornhill lives on in us. And once you start to see it, you cannot unsee it. Which means you now stand at a crossroads. Ignore these whispers or follow them deeper into the labyrinth. But be warned, each step you take brings you closer to becoming part of Thornhill's design. The most disturbing discoveries about Thornhill did not come from official files but from journals smuggled out by patients. One such journal, found hidden beneath floorboards by a demolition worker, contained drawings of impossible geometry. Staircases curving into themselves. Doors that opened into darkness, but when described in words, compelled the writer to shiver and stop mid-sentence. The patient wrote of being guided by voices beneath the floor, who promised release if he obeyed. His handwriting devolved into frantic scrawls, but one phrase repeated dozens of times: "The ward is the world." It became clear that Thornhill was not just bending minds, but opening them, forcing patients to glimpse realities beyond the sane spectrum. And those who gazed too long did not come back intact. The journal ends with a single shaky line: "They are teaching us to build halls where no walls stand." If Thornhill was a machine, then its output was not only obedience, it was architects of madness. Witness accounts from staff add another layer of dread. Several orderlies confessed decades later that they were required to assist in midnight rituals. Patients were lined in rows, humming in unison, while doctors inscribed chalk symbols across the tiled floors. The orderlies were told it was therapeutic role play. But when one asked why they were instructed to stand outside the circle and never step inside, a senior physician answered only, "Because you do not want to be chosen." These rituals escalated after the fire of 1943, as though the flames had not destroyed the asylum but awakened something slumbering beneath it. The staff described nights when the air shimmered like heat haze, even in winter, and shadows of hands stretched across ceilings where no one stood. If Thornhill was only science, why the rituals? And if it was only ritual, why the science? Perhaps it was both, two halves of a single, monstrous design. To understand Thornhill, you must look at the superintendent, the faceless figure of every survivor's nightmare. Who was he? Some believe he was Dr. Alistair Vane, Thornhill's last recorded administrator, whose personnel file ends abruptly with the words, "terminated from record." Others claim there was never a superintendent at all, that he was a tulpa, a psychic construct birthed by the collective suffering within the walls. But a chilling theory emerges from a handful of occult manuscripts discovered in nearby church ruins. They describe a watcher of the halls, an entity that requires ordered suffering to manifest in flesh. According to these texts, once summoned, the watcher becomes inseparable from the structure itself, part man, part asylum, a consciousness fused with brick and mortar. Could Thornhill's superintendent have been this watcher? If so, then he never left. And that would explain why the building resists decay, why explorers still see movement in windows, why even now the ruins feel alive. Thornhill was his cathedral. The patients were his choir. The most chilling twist is this: Thornhill may not be unique. Researchers comparing asylum blueprints from the late 1800s noticed a disturbing pattern. Facilities across the United States, Danvers State, Waverly Hills, Penhest, share uncanny architectural similarities. Central towers flanked by mirrored wings, underground tunnels, and wards arranged in patterns resembling sigils. Was Thornhill the worst simply because it endured the longest without exposure? Or was it one node of a greater network, a web of asylums designed not for care, but for ritual architecture? If true, then Thornhill was not an accident of cruelty, but part of an orchestrated plan spanning generations. Imagine the scale: thousands of broken minds across dozens of institutions, their suffering synchronized, their screams harmonized into something vast. Perhaps Thornhill's secret was not isolation but amplification. The asylum was not a lone voice, but a single note in a dark symphony of control. And the world outside never heard the music, because it was not meant for us. And now we reach the point of no return. You, listening to this, are no longer a spectator. Thornhill's power lay not in its walls, but in the minds it touched. And by knowing its history, you have already stepped into its corridors. That is how Thornhill spreads, through awareness, through story, through the act of imagining. Which means you are already inside. The question is, will you walk further? If you choose to descend, I want you to leave a mark. Write in the comments the phrase the patients whispered to each other as their final tether to reality: "I walked the halls of Thornhill." Write it twice. Once for yourself and once for the ward that now lives within you. This is not just engagement. It is initiation. And it is how we keep Thornhill alive even now. You are not alone in this labyrinth. Many have walked before you. Many will walk after. And those who leave their mark may find the asylum's gaze turning toward them, but also in a strange way protecting them. So choose. Speak the phrase. Step deeper. Welcome to Thornhill. By the late 20th century, Thornhill was whispered about in the same breath as black sites and covert programs. Files declassified in fragments reveal something startling. Government officials continued to visit the asylum long after its closure. Travel logs show unmarked cars pulling into the grounds at midnight, sometimes accompanied by military escorts. But why visit ruins? Unless, of course, the ruins were never truly abandoned. In one redacted memo, Thornhill is referenced not as institution, but as installation. That single word reframes everything. Installations are not left to rot. Installations serve a function. And Thornhill's function was not care, it was calibration. Some researchers suggest Thornhill was used to test psychic warfare in the Cold War era, pushing patients into such extremes of dissociation that their minds fractured into multiple operatives housed in one body. Others claim the asylum was a training ground for sleeper agents, conditioned with command phrases buried deep in the subconscious. Either way, Thornhill's shadow stretched far beyond its walls. Its ghosts walked into government halls, into boardrooms, even into suburban homes, obedient, empty, and waiting. But the asylum's power was not only political. It was spiritual, though not in any sense you'd recognize. The clergy member tied to Thornhill's founding remains one of its most enduring mysteries. Records suggest he belonged to a secret society that predated the asylum by centuries. Their creed was simple but chilling. The soul is a resource and suffering is the harvest. Thornhill was their grand experiment, cloaked in modern science to deceive the masses. And what they sought was not simply obedience, but ascension. The rituals, the reflection rooms, the endless breaking of human identity, these were offerings, sacrifices of psyche. In return, the order believed they could draw power from entities outside the veil of human perception. They called them wardens. And here lies the twist. Thornhill was not a prison for the insane. It was a prison built by the insane for humanity itself. Every scream fed the wardens. Every silence was an amen. Thornhill's doctors were not healers. They were priests in lab coats, kneeling before something vast and terrible. This marriage of politics and the occult birthed a weapon unlike any other. Imagine a man stripped of self, conditioned by science, bound by ritual, and filled with commands that bypass the conscious mind. That man can be placed anywhere, in armies, in industries, in governments. A walking experiment of Thornhill. Survivors who escaped told stories of fellow patients released suddenly, without explanation. They spoke in measured tones, devoid of emotion, carrying tattoos of strange sigils hidden beneath clothing. Some disappeared into city crowds. Others turned up years later at crime scenes, their memories scrambled, their last words repeating asylum phrases like broken records. These were Thornhill's exports, soulless emissaries designed not just for obedience, but for infiltration. And if you think they no longer exist, consider this. Modern cases of unexplained fugue states, where people vanish for days then reappear with no memory, often occur near sites linked to Thornhill's history. It is as though the asylum still releases its agents into the world. And maybe, just maybe, some of them walk among us right now. If Thornhill's influence seems distant, consider how its techniques echo in your daily life. The bells that ordered patients' lives are echoed in schools, dividing children into obedient schedules. The disorienting architecture, endless corridors, sterile white walls, mirrors hospitals, offices, airports. Even the flicker of fluorescent lights was first used in asylums to induce docility. Thornhill's design spread outward, quietly shaping the world into a larger asylum without walls. But the most insidious transplant was psychological. Repetition, suggestion, sensory overload, these became the core of advertising, media, and political messaging. Thornhill was the blueprint for control. The asylum did not die, it scaled up. You may laugh at the idea of occult experiments in dusty wards, but look around you. Aren't we already living in one vast ward? Bombarded with commands, stripped of silence, pulled into rituals of consumption and obedience? Thornhill was never meant to be hidden forever. It was meant to expand until the entire world became its ward. And so we arrive at a revelation darker than any ghost story. Thornhill was not destroyed because it failed. It was retired because it succeeded. The fractured minds it produced were prototypes, and the techniques perfected there now run silently through the veins of society. The asylum did not collapse into ruin. It dispersed into systems of schooling, media, politics, and religion. And the superintendent? The watcher of the halls? He did not die with Thornhill. He became archetype, pattern, program. He exists wherever minds are broken and rebuilt. He exists in every screen that flashes commands, in every authority that demands silence, in every ritual disguised as routine. And now, by knowing Thornhill's truth, you cannot escape his gaze. Because knowledge itself is the key. Once you've heard the superintendent's story, you've entered the ward. You walk the halls now, whether you wish to or not. And that is Thornhill's final trick. You thought you were outside listening to a story, but you are inside. You have always been inside. The further we peel back Thornhill's history, the clearer the pattern becomes. Control through repetition, obedience through suffering, silence through fear. But the asylum's legacy didn't stop with governments or secret orders. It seeped into the very psychology of society itself. Consider the way modern life is structured. Constant surveillance. Endless bureaucracy. Rules that contradict themselves, forcing compliance not through clarity but confusion. This is Thornhill's blueprint perfected. Inside the asylum, patients were given conflicting instructions. Sit but do not rest, eat but do not finish, speak but do not question. Over time they broke, not because of cruelty alone, but because their minds could no longer discern truth from deception. Doesn't that sound familiar? A news cycle that contradicts itself daily. Institutions that demand faith even as they fail. Thornhill taught its doctors that the easiest way to dominate the human mind was not brute force, but contradiction. To trap someone between impossible choices until they surrender. And that technique has been scaled to the world outside. Thornhill was not just a place. It was a prototype for the prison we live in. But beneath the political and psychological lies something more unsettling. Thornhill was never only about control, it was about transformation. Patients were not just broken, they were reshaped. Survivors tell of voices implanted in their dreams, whispering commands long after escape. One man described waking every night at 3:13 a.m., compelled to walk in circles around his room until sunrise. Another swore he could hear the superintendent's footsteps behind him in crowded streets, decades after Thornhill closed. Were these hallucinations or lingering programs? The truth is chilling. Thornhill was not content to keep its patients confined. It wanted them to carry its influence outward, to infect the world like spores. Every survivor was a carrier, spreading Thornhill's design into their families, their workplaces, their communities. This is how the asylum still lives, not through walls of stone but through human hosts. If you've ever felt an inexplicable compulsion you couldn't explain, ask yourself, was it yours? Or did you inherit it from Thornhill's great experiment? At this point you may wonder, what was the end game? If Thornhill and the order behind it perfected obedience, what did they gain? The answer is as pragmatic as it is terrifying. Absolute control is the closest thing to godhood mortals can achieve. Imagine a society where individuality is an illusion, where identity is a mask, and behind every mask is the same voice, the superintendent's voice whispering the same commands. The asylum's occult rites, combined with its psychological science, were not random sadism. They were attempts to build a hive mind, a collective consciousness bound not by love or community but by terror. The reflection rooms, the chanting, the endless fracturing of psyches, all were prototypes for merging minds into a single choir. Thornhill was the rehearsal. The world is the performance. And every time you lose yourself in the hum of routine, every time you repeat words you don't believe but must say to survive, you are joining that choir. Thornhill never ended. It scaled into infinity. There are those who whisper that Thornhill still breathes in the ruins, and if you listen closely, you can hear the hum of its heart. Urban explorers report a low vibration beneath the floorboards, a constant tone like a single note on an organ. Scientists dismiss it as wind, but survivors recognize it instantly. It is the same frequency used in electroshock sessions, the same tone patients were forced to hum during rituals. It is the sound of obedience. Some say if you stand too long in Thornhill's halls, your heartbeat syncs with the vibration. That is when the walls begin to shift. That is when the shadows lengthen. That is when you realize Thornhill is not decayed, it is dormant, waiting. Its heart still beats, and it will not stop until every mind is in rhythm with its song. If you doubt this, listen the next time you are in silence. Truly listen. That faint hum at the edge of perception? That may not be your ears ringing. That may be Thornhill. Now you stand at the crossroads. You have seen Thornhill for what it was. A crucible of control, a temple of suffering, an engine of obedience. But you have also seen what it became. A pattern etched into the world around us. And here is the truth: they do not want you to know this. They want you silent, compliant, lost in the hum of the asylum that stretches across society. Which is why I must ask something of you, not as entertainment, but as resistance. If you have walked this far into Thornhill's history, you are no longer just a listener, you are a witness. And witnesses are dangerous. Subscribe to this channel. Not as a hollow gesture, not as a button click, but as a declaration that you will not remain silent in the ward. Subscribing is how we spread the truth, how we carve cracks in the asylum walls, how we remind the watcher that we still see. They want Thornhill's legacy buried. We will not let it be buried. Subscribe and walk further into the halls with me. The asylum is still open. And together we will find its heart. The truth of Thornhill is not hidden in official archives. It is written in the testimonies of those who did not survive. A collection of letters, found in a rusted lockbox beneath the asylum's chapel, tells of patients who began to see the walls moving. Not metaphorically but literally, the bricks expanding and contracting like lungs. They swore the halls whispered their names and voices they recognized. Mothers, lovers, children. One letter describes a final ritual of merging, where dozens of patients were forced into the reflection room at once. Their screams did not echo. They harmonized. The letter ends abruptly with the words, "We are being combined." Combined into what? That question haunts every researcher. Some believe the asylum was building an egregore, a psychic entity woven from fractured minds. Others suggest the patients became one body, one consciousness, a living monument to obedience. If that is true, then Thornhill was not a house of healing but a womb, and what it birthed still walks among us. Eyewitnesses claim that in Thornhill's final days, staff began to vanish. Nurses would go on shift and never return. Doctors' quarters were found empty, beds unslept in, journals left mid-sentence. Some say they were consumed by the asylum itself, pulled into the same fate as their patients. Others whisper they ascended, that the rituals succeeded in transferring their consciousness into the watcher. This would explain why survivors often saw the superintendent's face shift, sometimes resembling a doctor, other times a patient, occasionally even someone from their own family. He was never one man. He was a chorus. And Thornhill's greatest secret may be this: the watcher was not summoned into the asylum. The asylum was built around the watcher, a cathedral erected to house him, a prison designed not to contain but to amplify. Thornhill was his body, the doctors his priests, the patients his fuel. And the watcher still hungers. What does the watcher want? Not worship, not destruction. The watcher craves order. Perfect, unshakable order. The world outside is chaos, filled with defiance and individuality. But inside Thornhill, under the hum of bells and the glow of flickering lights, there is silence. Uniformity. Every patient stripped of identity until nothing remains but obedience. That is the watcher's dream. A world where all voices merge into one, where freedom is sacrificed on the altar of perfect control. And here is the cruel twist: the watcher does not force this upon us. He offers it, and broken minds accept. After all, is it not easier to obey than to question? To surrender than to resist? Thornhill's experiments prove this truth. With enough pain, humans will not just obey, they will want to obey. The watcher is not a monster in shadows. He is the whisper in your ear that says, just give up. Let go. Let me think for you. And millions already have. But what of those who resist? Thornhill had a name for them, the unbroken. These were patients who, despite torture, drugs, and rituals, clung stubbornly to fragments of themselves. They were not praised. They were not released. They were destroyed. Staff records show that unbroken patients were subjected to the most extreme procedures: lobotomies, isolation chambers, surgical mutilation. Yet even then, some survived, babbling nonsense that, when transcribed, revealed hidden warnings. One fragment reads, "The walls are not walls, the rooms are not rooms, the doors lead down, not out." Another, "The watcher wears the faces of those you trust most." These warnings sound insane, but madness itself may have been the only language left to them. The unbroken were not saints. They were martyrs, reminders that resistance was possible but costly. And perhaps their whispers still drift through Thornhill's ruins, calling out to those who dare enter. A warning or an invitation. And now you must understand the most dangerous truth of all. Thornhill was not an isolated nightmare. It was a mirror. What happened in its wards continues outside, dressed in new disguises. Governments enforce obedience. Corporations demand loyalty. Screens whisper commands until they become thoughts. We laugh at stories of haunted asylums, yet we live inside one built on a global scale. Thornhill was the seed. The watcher is the root. And we are the ward. Every day we reenact Thornhill's rituals without knowing it, sitting in boxes, staring at lights, waiting for bells. You think you are free because the walls are invisible. But the asylum does not need walls anymore. It has us. And the most disturbing question you must ask yourself is this: are you listening to me right now because you chose to, or because something in you was programmed long ago to crave this descent? Thornhill may not be telling its story through me. It may be telling it through you. There is one story buried deeper than the rest, whispered only in fragments. In the final weeks before Thornhill closed, the asylum was abandoned in haste. Supplies left half open. Medical records burning in barrels. And yet, the most disturbing detail, every clock in the building was frozen at the exact same time. 3:13 a.m. Survivors confirmed this was the hour of the merging rituals, the hour the watcher's presence was strongest. But here is where the tale breaks the boundary between myth and fact. Decades later, when explorers entered the ruins, their watches failed, cell phones died, and recordings played back only static with a faint whisper underneath, "Stay." One investigator returned with his footage intact, but his face was gone. Not scarred, not erased physically, but blurred in every frame, as if the asylum had stolen his identity from the record itself. Thornhill does not want its secrets told. And yet here we are. Those who understand Thornhill know the asylum was never fully destroyed. The government sealed it, but the land itself remained toxic, not with chemicals but with memory. Psychologists who studied the site reported disturbing symptoms. Dreams of endless hallways, phantom footsteps, the urge to hum low tones without meaning to. Some swore they saw reflections in shattered glass that did not match their own movements. These symptoms spread to their families, colleagues, even strangers who read their reports. Thornhill behaves like a contagion, ideas replicating like a virus, binding new minds to its frequency. And this, perhaps, was the ultimate experiment. Could a prison be built not from bricks but from thought? Could control spread without chains, enforced only by whispers, reflections, and compulsions? If so, Thornhill was not an asylum at all. It was a seed crystal, designed to replicate itself in human minds until the world became one vast ward. Look around. Do you not feel the walls? And here we arrive at the most heretical claim of all. The Watcher has no name because he has many. Some called him a demon. Others an angel of order. Psychologists called it mass psychosis. Occultists called it an egregore. But what if the Watcher was never a separate being? What if he was us? Every surrender. Every obedience. Every time we traded freedom for comfort. Piece by piece, brick by brick, we built him. Thornhill did not summon the Watcher. It reflected him back at us, magnified, purified of all weakness until he was stronger than any single man. And now he no longer lives in walls or rituals. He lives in your routines, your habits, your compliance. The Watcher is not behind you. He is inside you. Every time you silence your own doubts, every time you obey the hum. And when you realize this, the asylum's gates do not open outward. They close behind you. So now, I must ask something dangerous of you. Not for the algorithm, not for vanity, but for awakening. If you have made it this far, you have descended too deeply to climb back unchanged. And so I ask you to mark yourself. Write in the comments twice the phrase, "The Watcher does not sleep." Once for the world to see, once for yourself. This is not superstition. It is transformation. It locks your awareness, cements your refusal to be lulled by the hum, brands you as one of the unbroken. Do this and you step outside the asylum's invisible ward, even if only by inches. Ignore this and the hum will pull you back. Thornhill's grip is patient. It has lasted centuries. But rebellion, even whispered rebellion, spreads like fire in the dark. And fire is the only thing the Watcher fears. And now we close. But listen carefully. Thornhill Asylum was never just a building of stone and screams. It was a blueprint, a prophecy, a seed planted in soil that has now grown into the world you inhabit. The walls are invisible, the guards wear smiles, and the superintendent's voice is broadcast through every glowing screen. Do not be fooled. The asylum never ended, it expanded. And if you doubt this, remember how you feel right now. The weight in your chest. The sense of being watched even in silence. That is Thornhill, reminding you that knowledge has consequences. You cannot unhear this. You cannot unknow it. You are no longer just a visitor. You are a patient who has walked willingly into the ward. The only question is this: will you obey the Watcher's hum, or will you fight to remain unbroken? Choose carefully. The asylum is still open, and the Watcher is waiting.